Welcome back to Ready for Merge, the podcast show about what code changes are ready for merge in Bitcoin and Ethereum. On today's show, I'm going to be sharing an interview that I did with Mark Mackey, who goes by ETHDreamer in the Ethereum developer community. Mark became a full-time Ethereum core developer after quitting his job as a full-time engineer at Bloomberg during the COVID-19 pandemic. It was during the pandemic that Mark taught himself Rust and started to contribute to the Lighthouse code base. Lighthouse is a very popular open source consensus layer client implementation of Ethereum. It's another Meet the Devs interview from my Substack vault. This one was recorded back in August of last year, but so much of the conversation is still very relevant for anyone that's interested in learning more about Ethereum protocol development and the governance process. So without further ado, here's my interview with Mark.
My name is Mark Mackey. I go by ETHDreamer everywhere, like Twitter and Telegram and Reddit and GitHub. And I am a Lighthouse client dev. So I've been working on Lighthouse since 2021 full time, although I did some contributions earlier. That's mostly, in a gist, what I do.
And since you started contributing to the Lighthouse client, what would you say has been your biggest contribution to Ethereum protocol development?
Maybe it would be implementing the forks. So I think I did a lot of the implementation work on the merge and on Capella, and then kind of skipped over to Neb and did a lot of Electra, skipped over Fusaka, and now doing a lot of Glamsterdam. So I seem to TikTok on forks. I have a couple of EIPs. There's 4881, which I was a sole author. And then I've advocated for getting certain things. I've been kind of vocal about getting certain things into Ethereum, everything from MaxEB to deterministic proposer look ahead to blob parameter only forks. I wrote the EIP on that, and then another co-author joined from the EF. And then now it's been getting EPBS in. So I guess I've had a lot of influence over what has gone into what forks and implementing some forks, and I have a couple of EIPs. That's most of it.
It's a lot. I mean, of the EIPs, the Ethereum improvement proposals you've either authored or championed, pushed for in the Ethereum governance process, is there a particular EIP that you're most relieved or happy did actually get implemented and into an upgrade?
I guess I would maybe say, well, that's a tough question because, it's what goes in is a tricky thing because, you never know what's going to happen in the future, and there could potentially, you could wish that you had wrote it differently or put something else in or whatever. So right now I'm relieved that we had chosen EPBS. I hope that was the right decision. It, from everything that's available now, it seems to be. Um, I I am happy that we have MaxEB. I think that so far has turned out to be the right decision because of what was competing against it at the time. And at the time, there was it was either going to be basically a kind of censorship resistance, like CR proposal, but it was a precursor to Fossil, or an issuance adjustment. And well, issuance adjustments are always very contentious. And one of the primary reasons to do that adjustment was because we had too many validators. And MaxEB was the way that we could basically alleviate that concern without having to do something really contentious. And on top of it, after MaxEB got in, we had Fossil, which was a better design for censorship resistance come into development. So I'm happy, I'm relieved that it was MaxEB because it just, all indications right now are that it was the right decision.
Looking back at this history, conversely, are there any decisions or contributions that you regret that looking back, you're like, oh, I wish us as developers, Ethereum core developers, hadn't made that decision?
Not, I don't really remember any clear decisions being like on the table where it was like A or B and we chose like A and should have chosen B. Um, there's definitely things that like we would have done differently, but most of those revolve around like not thinking about it at the time. Um, like one of the biggest ones that I can feel right now is like we never should have had the execution payload embedded in the beacon block. It would have been much better if like the beacon block and the payload were like just two separate objects and you just put like a hash inside the beacon block instead of the whole thing inside. Um, doing that would have like made like even the EPBS, like our MEV flow much simpler. We wouldn't have had all these blinded objects. It would have like protected. I don't know if you're familiar with the low card crusader attack. It was called it like the thing where someone ripped apart a block like and published at the same time and stole MEV from a relay like a while back. But that would have been mitigated if we'd have done this. And like it just makes the protocol so much simpler. And it's like, well, we just didn't think about it at the time, because I don't think we were designing at the time for proposer builder separation. And that's always a thing is like usually the decisions that you wish you would have made, they're just not clear until, or like it doesn't become obvious until years down the road. And that's because we do a decent job, I think, of like trying to think what we do know right now. And as far as we can see into the future, we try to think about these things. Um, and so, yeah, it's usually not clear until how and why things are going to develop a certain way until later.
Before we talk a little bit deeper into the Ethereum development process, Mark, I want to get your story and go even further back to before you were an Ethereum developer at all. um, Tell me, Mark, what were you doing before working on Lighthouse, before you joined the Sigma Prime team?
So, yeah, it's a funny thing because I think it was at sometime around like 2018 that I decided that I wanted to get involved in Ethereum. But it was a long time until I actually ended up getting involved. You actually don't control what interests you. Um, it's really funny when you think about it. Like it's an unconscious process. Like something just kind of grabs your attention and you think about it a lot, but it's not something you get to choose. You can't just be like, "Oh, I'd love to be passionate about like accounting and then just be passionate." It's just something that happens from inside, I guess. And I had noticed that like I was just thinking a lot about Ethereum all the time, and it was just at the time it was something I was invested in and things, but really I decided like I think I want to do this. And I was already kind of a programmer at the time, but I didn't know if I wanted to do like smart contracts, or like what layer of the stack I wanted to work. And so I did some smart contract work. Um, but yeah, I didn't really know. And like at the time, funding for core devs was like there was no protocol guild. It was just the EF, and like I had heard that the pay was kind of poor, so I didn't quite know yet what I was going to do. And so I went to Bloomberg actually. I used to live in Minnesota, and then I moved to New York to work for Bloomberg. Um, and part of this was so I could buy more ETH because you know, um, Bloomberg just paid better than anything in like Minnesota. So yeah, I ended up being there, and I thought like, hey, maybe if Bloomberg gets involved in blockchain stuff, I could like be in the company doing something there. But yeah, I worked there for a couple of years, and I think while I was there, I kind of like refound that no, I really do think I just want to do this core dev thing. Like I want to try for it. And I had known Rust was a pretty cool language. I'd kind of heard that, but I wasn't a Rust dev. And so I just kind of reached out to like Paul Honor on Discord. He's one of the directors of Sigma Prime, and started asking him like kind of like, how does someone get involved in this and how does someone start working? And he was just kind of like, yeah, I mean, he basically just started making contributions. And so like that's what I did. I went out and I just kind of started to learn Rust, and started to make contributions on the side. And like eventually, they just kind of reached out and offered me a position. So I mean, it was not not difficult at the time, but it was before Ethereum Protocol Fellowship, and it was really just like get involved. Um, you contribute for free for a while, and people notice you.
How long were you contributing free before you got offered the position?
I mean, not that long. I think it was like 2020 is when I really started to learn Rust. I kind of took advantage of COVID because I didn't have to have like a commute anymore to work. I could just like be at home. And so I just like use that extra time to like learn Rust. And then yeah, I just started contributing. I'd do a couple PRs, look for like the low hanging fruit things, and just do what I could there. And I feel like maybe that was March through June-ish, sometime around there. And I think it was in July that they had actually offered me um, a job. So yeah.
That's awesome. Also, Mark, you started your story from you were interested in Ethereum. Tell me about how you heard about Ethereum.
So the first crypto I ever ended up in was Bitcoin. I believe that would have been around 2013 or 14. The funniest thing was like I heard about it from a random, I'll never be able to find it. It's like a rap song or something that someone had made, and it said like Bitcoin in it. And I was like, what's Bitcoin? And I started to look and, just went down the rabbit hole there. Um,
Was it Eminem? I know
well,
Eminem's rap
no,
about Bitcoin.
it was like
Okay.
some like like Anonymous, like the like hacking group or whatever. Like it was something like that. It was some like
Okay.
homemade, like really random thing you find when scrolling or something. And yeah, so I went down the rabbit hole there, and I thought it was really cool. And then like I really wasn't messing with like Litecoin or anything like that. I was like, these are all just copies of Bitcoin. And then the first time I heard of Ethereum was actually the DAO hack, because there were articles about like, yeah, Ethereum crashes after the DAO hack. Da, da. I started reading, I was like, oh wow, like so this crypto actually has like a programming language built in. That's different. Like that's not just like faster blocks or whatever Litecoin is doing. Like I could tell there was something different about this. And so yeah, that was when I started buying ETH. Um, and then yeah, I think I was pretty much involved at that time from like the 2017 bull run. I mean, I don't know that um, I was definitely excited about it that time, but at that time it was so amorphous and unclear. Like dApps, we thought like dApps, each dApp would have their own currency, and you would buy, you would buy their tokens in order to use the dApp, and things like Augur and stuff like that were around. It was so like amorphous, I guess. But at that time, I'd started to go to like meetups and talk to people about it, and it was just this really niche thing. Um, but yeah, so like whenever was shortly after the DAO hack. I'm actually not sure the year. That was like when I first started, and then like my interest just grew over the years.
It's interesting that probably the event that most people look to as the like the single part in Ethereum's history that was maybe the most like difficult
Controversial.
because it resulted in and controversial, and many Bitcoiners to this day still look at that as such an awful event in his that would make anybody want to like leave Ethereum or maybe not believe in Ethereum. That was the event that brought you into Ethereum.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, at least it was the thing that got like an article on my phone or something enough for me to notice it, you know? And um, yeah, I mean, my perspective looking back, obviously I'm biased, but like it was the realization that there is a social layer underneath blockchains and that we can choose to do things, you know, with that social layer. Um, that doesn't, at this time, that doesn't seem like the wrong decision, but it is something that we would never do again, I think. But I mean,
Hmm.
first ever smart contract blockchain, first ever hack, massive hack with like, I think multi-digit percentages of the supply. It's just not something we could have done at the time.
Yeah, I want to talk more about the social layer of all this, you being part of the social layer, and also that point that, developers would not do something like the DAO fork ever again. Ethereum has grown so much since those days, since when you got interested in it. Do you What's your vision for Ethereum? And has your vision for Ethereum changed over these years?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it's definitely changed over the years. Like over time, seeing us move towards like a layer two roadmap was really something that was definitely initially uncomfortable for me, you know, like because we were originally thinking of layer one scaling. Um, you know, I remember, I think it was called phase one and done at the time. The first time I kind of saw something around the layer two centric roadmap. But it was just like a maybe we'll do this. And that would have been around 2019. And then I think 2020, 2021, we really started to pivot in that direction, actually. And I remember watching a presentation by Vitalik about it that I can no longer find. And yeah, he basically showed that, like, okay, we can continue on the sharding journey and maybe we'll like 100x our scale. But like, if we go for roll ups, we get like 100,000x and it's much simpler. Like, why would we do sharding? And like, that was the right decision, but it was uncomfortable from a composability perspective. It was uncomfortable for all the reasons that it like has kind of all those narratives have shown up today um, that have been blasting Ethereum for the layer two roadmap over the last couple of years. But I think its wisdom is starting to shine through. Um, Not just in the sense of like, I mean, you can get better scaling, but like also that like if you want to have specialized applications for the chain that you would give different parties more control over their particular layer that they use Ethereum as a data availability layer. So like, I, j- sorry, I'm trying to answer the original question, which is like, has your view of Ethereum evolved? Well, Ethereum now is to be this like very strong layer one with these like layer twos um, that are serving excess um, transaction demand, basically. And when you like the unsung strength of this roadmap really is the like barbell strategy of being able to do a decentralized layer one while having layer twos that can be centralized and therefore faster than anything that's decentralized. At the same time, you can do both the centralization and speed by changing what you're doing. Um, and so that was a vision of Ethereum that wasn't obvious to me at first. Um,
Well, I mean, one thing I was going to say on the L2, L1 vision is when that initial pivot happened to L2s, the idea was that all of Ethereum end users would move to L2s, that developers would just stop focusing on the L1 and scaling would only happen through L2s. But now, at the time of our recording, which is like August 2025, there is more of a focus on this barbell strategy where people have stopped relying on L2s to extend the same guarantees of decentralization from Ethereum to L2s, but that L2s would remain centralized or significantly less decentralized than Ethereum, but that there will be quite a bit of effort on making sure that the L1 is still maybe not as scalable as L2s, but still pretty scalable for most use cases, and that there will be um, a strong user base for the L1, which I think is another kind of like iteration and change from the vision of like moving to an L2 centric roadmap. Because now it doesn't feel like it's an L2 centric roadmap. It's more L1 plus L2, um, trying to maybe do everything. Uh,
Yeah.
I mean, what would you say that's a accurate kind of take or interpretation?
Yes. Well, so I have my own takes on this, as people do. And yeah, it's really interesting the way we kind of ended up here. So I think I think even the path that we took sort of makes sense if you understand the research and how the research evolved. So right now we're doing things like pipelining on layer one, block level access lists for like parallelization, um, shorter slot times. These kinds of things are like, they're definitely going to give us like factors of 2, factors of 4, 8, so on. Um, but when we started the scaling discussion on Ethereum, like we weren't just looking at factors of 16 or like these kind of lower numbers. Um, it's just clear that if you're working within the constraints of trying to keep it decentralized at layer one, you can always squeeze these things out of the system. These are sort of like the low hanging fruit that you can get for scaling, but it wasn't where we had put our like hopes for scaling, because you can only like squeeze that so far, until you start running into diminishing returns. And that's why we had sort of ignored them at the time and gone for um like ZK scaling. But at the time that we had gone for ZK scaling, like you have to understand how undeveloped that technology was. Like it was, you know, I mean, we expected that a ZK equivalent, like an EVM equivalent, um, ZK rollup would take years, and that happened much, much faster um, than we expected, and like it just took time due to the improvements in ZK scaling technology. Like we can actually scale layer one as a rollup, and that's the direction we're moving now. Um, and it just wasn't possible before, and it wouldn't have been possible if we hadn't have pivoted to the layer two roadmap earlier.
Yeah, these are pretty major shifts in the vision for Ethereum and the technology that Ethereum, the blockchain protocol, is. I I think it's exciting. I'm glad that you laid it out. I still think it's going to take years for all of this to play out, and we're definitely going to have to check back in on um, how this vision plays out over the next several years. I want to get back a little bit, though, in the latter half of our conversation to your journey as an Ethereum developer and contributing to the client development of Lighthouse. Because I think as Ethereum, the technology keeps evolving, a really kind of evergreen part of this series that I'm doing with Meet the Devs is talking about the social layer of Ethereum that will always exist and always be needed for the maintenance of this technology. Um, you've shared how your vision has changed over the years and how you've seen the vision of Ethereum actually change in terms of roadmap over the years. Tell me about how your contributions as a Lighthouse developers changed over the years you went since you went full time. So you were contributing kind of freelance, and then you got hired on full time at Sigma Prime. And as we were talking kind of before this interview, you did mention that you've become more active on the governance decisions being made on the all core developers calls. Can you talk about how your contributions to Ethereum, how that has evolved over the years?
Sure, yeah. So, um, like you said, and as I mentioned earlier, I've gotten more involved around the decisions that are made for what ends up going into forks for Ethereum, and this has been kind of a happy accident. Like, I think it started in Electra when we were debating what to do, and there was a particular call where I think POTUS was the only one who had really had a chance to evaluate how difficult it would be to implement MaxCB in Electra, and his estimation was that it would be a bit too difficult, that it wasn't ready for the fork, and so we kind of just were like, okay, it sounds like MaxCB's out, and we looked at the other options that we had. Um, Side note, Electra was a funny fork. It like, we'd
Why?
had three forks in a row. Yeah, well, we had three forks in a row where it was very clear what our priority was. Like we knew we wanted the merge. Well, I mean, we had Altair. First, we had to launch the beacon chain. Then there was like some stuff with Altair, light clients, and some fixes, so on. But then it was like, obviously, we need the merge. Everybody's worried about the merge, right? And so we did the merge. Then obviously, we got to get people's withdrawals activated because people can't withdraw yet, and they've been waiting for that for 2 years. So that's in. Deneb scaling L2's obviously part of our roadmap. That's in. We get that in, and then it's like, okay, what now? Like we hadn't had to think about what now for so long because our like backlog of things to do was so full for so long that it kind of, I don't know, I feel like we just didn't have a chance to step back and go, oh wait, what goes in this next fork? And like that's kind of why I think Electra was a bit of a mess. Um, and so like yeah, and we were just head down focusing on shipping and not really looking at like a little bit more into the future. And so when I had heard that MagCB was kind of on ice and I looked at the other proposals that were there, I was just like, I don't like, I like MagCB. I think it's probably the better thing to go in this fork. And then I just started basically going around and asking people, like, what do you think about this? And I found like a strong amount of agreement. And so like I kind of joined some other existing efforts to prototype MagCB. They were mostly done by other contributors, but I just like came in and did a couple things to make sure we got across the finish line by the next call. Um, and then, when it was like, okay, anything more on Electra? Like, I remember Danny asking that. And I just spoke up and was like, I think we should take another look at MaxCB. And then that kind of got it back on the table. And then like some other people voiced support. And then I started scheduling breakout rooms for us to talk about it. And the decision was made over the next two calls or so, like, yeah, I think like to do MaxCB and not to do the version of inclusion list that we had at the time. And that kind of showed me that like, um, I mean, it wasn't a lot of effort to change the direction. Um, and it, like it was something that people wanted, but they kind of just weren't saying, I think. Um, there's Sometimes there can be a lot of like imposter syndrome in protocol development. I think that's part of the reason that people don't say things, maybe the biggest reason. Um, Other reasons just being that people have their head down focusing on like what's right in front of them and they haven't had time to have an opinion on whatever is being discussed, you know? Um, so like that was kind of my first time changing the direction of the protocol. And then um, as we got towards this last fork, every year or two, we have like the clients from all sorts of teams get together somewhere. This year it was in Berlin. And we were talking about pipelining. People had different presentations about what they wanted to go into the Ethereum, like into the fork. Um, and it was kind of unclear. Everybody kind of knows what the candidates are, but we didn't really have the hard discussions about what we should prioritize. And I could sense that it was going to be another one of those forks like Electra, where like it just wasn't like we have competing priorities. People want fossil, people want EPBS, people want shorter slots, so on. Um, and what basically started this was like I was sitting in a presentation from someone on the proving team, and they told me that real-time proving will be viable within like 6 months if we have pipelining. And I was thinking, oh, so then we need pipelining like now. Like I know we'd had discussions about pipelining, but like it wasn't really made clear to consensus devs that like this is a big priority. And so I just started running around talking to people like, hey, did you know the proving teams are like getting this close? And it turns out like a lot of consensus devs hadn't. And so like um I just had run around and discovered like I think we need pipelining, and so now we have to decide between the two pipelining proposals. And it was like between delayed execution and EPBS. And so I was like, okay, we're gonna have an impromptu meeting tomorrow at like 11. I was like running around telling people. And then we gathered, and then I was like, okay, this is my understanding of delayed execution. This is my understanding of EPBS. Let's share thoughts about this. And it ended up being like a 6-hour debate over like 2 days that ended up being hosted. And I was like, I am so glad that we did this when we're all together, because there's like no way we could have been on the same page on all the nuances, because you have to debate like, how does this affect pre-comps? Like, how does this affect um like inclusion latency? How does this pair with fossil? How does it, like it was like just trying to weigh these two things out. And that's when I think devs kind of reached consensus on 7732. So long story short, like I've been influencing the protocol more in this direction, and it's come out of the realization that devs often have their heads down when it comes to the medium term and long term. Like client devs have their heads down about how long, or about exactly what the vision is and what the priority is in the medium and long term. And so like the researchers often are looking more at the long term, more so than the medium term. And so where the medium term kind of gets settled is when researchers and client devs talk to each other, and that kind of happens on these all core dev debates in deciding what happens on the next fork. And like the puzzle piece that I've been slotting into is trying to be that bridge between the researchers and the client devs, at least on the Lighthouse team. And just trying to get my head around the proposals as much as possible, and then run around explaining the nuances to other client devs to get as many people on the same page as possible, so that when it comes time to make a decision, we can make an informed decision.
Can you talk about what then an average day looks like for you now? I mean, would you say that you're like in terms of how you would divide up your time between actually implementing changes into the Lighthouse code base versus um, researching what this EIP actually does versus setting up these meeting outreach, kind of getting a sense of what people are thinking or trying to convince people who have reservations about a particular decision that needs to be made on the all core developers calls. Like how much of your time is split between actual programming versus like more outreach and governance? Tell me about that.
Yeah, so I generally this is just me. I generally focus on one thing at a time. So like I don't generally have days where I mix all of those things. So I'll just have like time periods where like I'm more focused on one, and then another and another. And this is just the way that I work. I work best when like I'm not context switching all the time. So over the last like like the maybe since that Berlin conference for like the next month, I was just doing things like talking to people, writing articles about EPBS, understanding the counter arguments, understanding, what's like where it's strong, where it's weak, and really participating in the debate and trying to push things forward. Um, and that's crazy because there's just so many nuances. And like, I don't know, EPBS is unique because the the reasons to do it were not the reason that it was originally created. And that caught a lot of devs by surprise. I think devs initially are like, we don't really like, what are you talking about? Proposer builder separation is like not a priority right now. Like that's everyone's initial reaction, including mine. And so like it just took a lot of like understanding the subtleties because we're doing it for pipelining and it's great for pipelining better than anything else. Um, but yeah, so it just took like getting my head across that and then communicating that was quite a challenge, and I spent a lot of time on it. And then once the decision was made to get it in, then I've been pivoting towards actually like writing the code for Glamsterdam. Um, and there's like an external contributor helping me out right now from the protocol fellowship, so that's been nice. And so I actually spent a lot of time on reviewing his PRs. Um, and then also like with Fusaka potentially being delayed, I'm getting pulled off onto Fusaka stuff. Like, we have quite a bit of people working on Fusaka, but like whenever there's like a deadline crunch or like a test net is like not behaving well and they need extra resources, they'll pull me in as well. So, and that's just like where I am right now. Like I imagine, when I'll probably be involved in Glamsterdam throughout Glamsterdam's development, and that will mean that the fork after Glamsterdam, other people will be taking over, and I'll be less across that kind of stuff. I tend to like to focus on whatever I'm doing to the exclusion of other things.
For anyone that's listening to this episode, also wanting to get involved in Ethereum protocol development, what are some pieces of advice that you would give them on what kind of skills are really essential for doing what you do? And also some tips on like what the best way to get started is.
Um, I mean, so the essential components of like a person is probably like you want to be passionate about Ethereum. Um, like that's just where it's going to work out best, because it's going to be really interesting to you. And I think most people that want to go in this direction already are, but know that like that's probably the biggest driver. And then the skills you can pick up along the way. Obviously, you'll need to know at least one of the languages, like the programming languages that one of the clients is written in if you want to be a client dev. If you're trying to be like a researcher, you probably need additional like probably math training and things like that. I wouldn't know much about what it takes to be like a protocol researcher. Actually, it'd be a good question for one of them. Um, but yeah, like personal characteristics would be like you care about Ethereum, you are like humility actually goes a long way. Like everyone that we work with here is quite humble. And that's like a massive strength of Ethereum. It's what allows like people to come in that are new, but they just have like a good idea or something and they want to bring it forward. Like it lets their contributions come to light and like someone might come in with a good idea who not many people know very well. It's definitely gonna be a challenge, but like if you have a good idea and you can get people on board, you can like change the direction of the protocol if it's a good idea. So like, and that's because I think people are humble and we're all trying to do what's good for the network. And then, yeah, like I would say like if you want to make it easier to start, there's a couple of client teams that like need more people. I would like a lot of people pick Lighthouse, and I think that's probably because of Rust, and Rust is such a great language. But Um, like Nimbus could use people for sure. Teku could use people. I'm not sure about Prism, but probably like, um, But like especially I would say like Nimbus just because not a lot of people know that language. So like if you like Ethereum and you're willing to learn that language, like there's a really high chance you can just slot right into that team. Um, so yeah, and if you want to start somewhere and then pivot somewhere else later, you always can. Um, but yeah, it's like just come in with an open mind, ready to ask questions. Um, and especially if you contribute to places where there's not already a bunch of people contributing, you will have a really great chance of of just getting in, I would think.
Nice. Thank you. I hope to highlight and feature some of those more under-resourced like client teams. In this next and final section of our interview, it's all rapid fire questions. I'm hoping with these you don't take too long to think about them, but also just give like very kind of short takes, short insights. So the first rapid fire question is, what do you like most about being an Ethereum client developer?
Just the ability to work on something that's way bigger than me and see my own contributions in the work and work on something that's incredibly interesting that I would think about anyway. I think those are the main things.
And what do you dislike most about what you do?
Maybe the pressure of making a mistake that could end up, forking the network or something like that is really all I can think of that is tough, honestly. It's just a big responsibility.
What's an area of protocol development that you think is that you wish that more people would be contributing to, that is kind of underserved in your opinion?
I think more client devs should get involved or um, at least one person from each client team should spend a little bit more time looking at future roadmap stuff. I guess the EF disagrees now. They were saying we were spending too much time, but I feel like it just would have been way more painful if at least some people hadn't looked at these things. It's definitely I think it saves time in the long run, honestly, because making the wrong decision can cost a lot of time. So
Yeah. What's one area of improvement that you think could have a huge impact on the Ethereum governance process?
that it's like having more clients more across the different proposals because it's very hard to get one person that's across all of them. I mean, right now, when we're deciding, for example, whether or not to include fossil in Amsterdam, there's only one person who's done both, and they said it was good, but we have one opinion. It would be great if we had a couple more. We could make that decision earlier. Yeah.
Good point. What do you wish? What's one thing that you wish somebody told you about working in Ethereum development that you wish you knew or that they told you before you got into it?
It's not as hard as it looks from the outside. It's not as crazy as it looks from the outside. When you look from the outside, you have these kind of rose-colored glasses, maybe, or um, yeah, this kind of thing. Oh, being a core dev, it's gonna be this crazy thing. It's gonna be so hard. You're gonna work with these crazy, and it's definitely true. We work around incredibly intelligent people, but at the end of the day, we're just people. So that kind of stuff can be hard to feel from the outside, I think. I don't know that there's a way I could have just been told that though. It's something you kind of got to go through.
Yeah, you got to experience it. Last rapid fire question. If you weren't working on Ethereum, is there an open source project that you would want to be working on? And if so, what is it?
I don't think there's anything I'd rather be working on than Ethereum. So yeah, I don't even know what I would really do. So I'm glad Ethereum exists. Uh, I think there was one that I did have a interesting. There was a question. If you want to ask one more, but you asked like about the challenges of working in an open source protocol. So if you want to ask, because I think there's a.
Yeah.
I don't know if anyone's ever said this before. I think it's a good answer. Yeah. So
Okay. Yeah, please share.
So not just open source, but like on a blockchain specifically, there's a challenge that like is, as far as I know, nowhere else, which is the problem of bugs in a blockchain are incredibly high stakes compared to another protocol or like anything else. Obviously, there's always going to be security concerns, but like we have this strange thing where like we might discover a bug and it has had happened in the past, but the major thing that you need to do is get the new release out for the code and then get the majority of validators to run the new release before anyone figures out that the bug exists, especially if it's like a consensus bug. And like that has led to all sorts of crazy things where you have to like hide the bug inside a big refactor so that it's difficult to tell what's happened. And I've even heard of like the Geth devs like refactoring the whole thing, fixing the bug, waiting for it to be inoculated, then just refactoring it all back. Because otherwise it would just be too clear to anyone that was like looking closely at the changes what they had fixed and that there was currently a consensus bug. So like that aspect of sneaking in like a fix for a bug and then getting things inoculated is like I don't know of anything else that has to deal with that, and it's really fascinating that way.
Yeah, I'm really glad you mentioned that because it also puts into perspective the pressure of making large changes to code. If you are changing a very, very small aspect of the Ethereum protocol, then maybe identifying those bugs is a little bit less of an arduous task. But the risk when it comes to, say, completing something like the merge upgrade, or like you said, I think we talked very briefly about issuance changes. It's like the stakes of the bug that could be discovered and then the process in which trying to fix that bug, it's not as easy as any other type of software when it comes to a public blockchain. Like identifying and fixing those bugs is just a, a much bigger can of worms.
Yeah. Yeah, because in regular clients, like obviously you can tell people like, hey, there's a security vulnerability, like update your stuff soon, like as soon as you can. But like if you announce that to the world, people are gonna be like, oh, where is that? And then just immediately try to trigger that on mainnet. So you have to like be secretive about it. It's kind of wild.
Yeah, yeah. There's definitely some interesting ones in guest history that I know have been documented. But I'm guessing, have you gone through some in your time for the Lighthouse client in terms of security bugs that you guys have had to refactor into your?
I think, well, I know one was caught before Electra went live that would have been like that. Um, I don't know that we've ever had like a Lighthouse specific one. I think there was a couple that where like every client kind of did it wrong. Um, and in those cases, like, yeah, we'll publish the release. We won't really talk much about it. And then we'll like kind of try to reach out to like the largest staking pools to be like, hey, like, can you know, it would be nice if you could upgrade soon, that kind of thing. Because we just need like a majority of stake to switch to it. Um, and then usually we'll disclose the bug after. Um, but yeah, it is I guess one of the things that we have done where we've like tried to get as much of the network inoculated as possible, but obviously we don't know all the stakers and we can really hit the like big players.
Yeah, that's the double-edged sword of decentralization. It makes the network more resilient, but also at the same time, it makes it less resilient in a time of a crisis when you need to really reach out to the key stakeholders. And the more decentralized it is, and the less centralized providers there are, major pools there are, the harder that becomes. Really, really fascinating, though. I appreciate the time, Mark. Thank you for this conversation. Anything else you wanted to share before we um, end off our interview?
I think that's most of it. I did have some, yeah, I think that's most of it. I had some rambly answers there, but hopefully that'll be something you can edit into something coherent.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Ready for Merge. I'm your host, Christine D. Kim, and the interview that you just heard was a rerun of an episode that I did for a different mini series, actually, one that was geared towards my premium subscribers for my Substack. I'm slowly starting to release the interviews that I recorded exclusively for my Substack publicly on the Ready for Merge podcast feed. If you like today's episode, please be sure to like, comment, interact with the episode, and subscribe to the show to get notified about when new episodes air. About next week's episode, it's going to be a bi-weekly brief. I do these shorter Ready for Merge episodes that's just me talking about the main, most relevant, and latest updates in Bitcoin and Ethereum protocol development. So next week's show will be that executive briefing that I try and do once every 2 weeks, so that I'm not falling behind on all the updates, because things do move fast in Ethereum and Bitcoin development. But sometimes it ends up being once every 3 weeks, which is kind of what's going to happen for next week. But I have been keeping an eye on what's been going on lately with Bitcoin and Ethereum, so I'm excited to share more updates with you about that next week. So stay tuned. Thank you for listening, and stay ahead of the curve with me on Bitcoin and Ethereum protocol development. Bye, everyone.